our general view is that plants are the right way to sequester carbon, and that beyond CO2, we need to kind of mobilize business, mobilize policy, governments, and do that on a global scale to start holistically looking at ways to deal with some of the biggest issues.
Welcome to the Business for Good podcast,
a show where we, Paul Shapiro and Tony Okamoto,
spotlight companies making money by helping solve some of the world's most pressing problems.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to the latest episode in which we are profiling a really interesting startup founded in 2014, Lingrove, the makers of tree-free wood made from flax.
This episode is particularly timely since not only did two economists just win Nobel Prizes for their work on climate change economics, but the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change just released a new report basically saying that we are in deep doo-doo if we don't make dire changes now to avert the worst warming of the planet. How deep is that doo-doo? Civilizationally threateningly deep, they say.
One of the biggest contributors to climate change is deforestation, since trees suck CO2 from the air and help keep the planet cooler. They also provide homes and food for wildlife, so when we cut down the trees for wood, it makes life so much more difficult for our feathered, furry, and scaly friends. Well, the scaly ones aren't so much my friends, but Paul really loves them.
I do love all animals, including those with scales, but sadly, love for the planet and its inhabitants isn't enough to help save them. Legislation is certainly part of the answer, but without viable alternatives to our destructive ways, think clean energy compared to fossil fuels, it's not so likely we'll be able to save humanity from, well, ourselves. That's where innovative companies like Lingrove come in.
Is the future of wood tree-free? That's what Joe Luttwak, CEO and founder of Lingrove, is trying to make happen. Hear from Joe in this new interview about his journey from working at Ferrari to founding a guitar company to now founding and running a company whose goal is, just like the Lorax in Dr. Seuss's tale, nothing short of saving trees.
And it's the first interview we've done where a guest plays a musical score live for us, all on a wood-free acoustic guitar, of course. Enjoy. All right, Joe, welcome to the show.
Super psyched to be here.
Welcome, Joe. So why make tree-free wood?
We're looking at a situation as far as global climate change that is exacerbated by deforestation. And in fact, it's estimated that deforestation is roughly 18% of CO2 emissions currently. So there's an increasing mandate to keep trees in the ground. I think for many years, it was just a matter of having, the natural opportunities, recreational opportunities that forests afford. And of course, they're beautiful. But now we're finding that from a sustainability perspective and frankly, from a long-term, existential perspective, humans have a mandate more than ever to stop deforestation. And so that's the big reason. For me personally, I started in the tree replacement business, so to speak, making musical instruments. And initially, we started with carbon fiber to make travel guitars, which were designed to be high-performance instruments that you could take anywhere. And then I realized that carbon fiber is actually worse from a life cycle analysis perspective than the old-growth wood that is currently still used today to make musical instruments. So old-growth wood, should sound like bad wood. People. I mean, these are the trees that we want to keep in the ground above all because they sequester the most carbon, have the biggest impact on ecosystems, and are nearly gone.
So, Joe, you say about 18% of greenhouse gas emissions come from deforestation. How much of that is because we want wood, or rather is it because we're deforesting for agricultural purposes or something else? Like, what's the primary reason all these trees are being cut down?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I wondered that myself, and I actually recently had an opportunity to meet with some government officials. Actually, they're more or less employed by the UN in Indonesia, where we have, the famous kind of infamous palm oil production happening. And, the official line is deforestation is happening in somewhere like, Indonesia, because they're clearing fields for palm oil. But actually, a big mechanism for the deforestation is that the trees that they are cutting down, and they first go in there and selectively do cut down trees, have a lot of value, right? Thinking of some of these rainforest woods, notably teak, let's say in Southeast Asia, which of course is still your desirable outdoor furniture wood. And these biggest trees, these oldest trees or most valuable trees, are really particularly valuable and are the first incursion into the forests. They're the reason that the poachers initially go in and create a trail and then widen it to a road. And then once you have a road, you're basically more or less the situation is lost. And this story is repeated all over the developing world. So Honduras comes to mind, Nicaragua in Central America, certainly the Amazon in Brazil and Bolivia and Peru, and back to Indonesia and Southeast Asia as well. The same panel that I was participating in for the Global Climate Action Summit that happened in San Francisco last month also had folks from the other often forgotten rainforest, second largest rainforest in Central Africa. And the story is the same there. So yes, it's true that slash and burn's happening for agriculture, but the first incursion and initial roads are to get those very valuable trees.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey in depth from sports cars to guitars to wood?
Yeah, so it's definitely not a linear path, but before sports cars, I was definitely, really into nature, and I had experiences as a little kid and also kind of through my teenage years camping in New England and going to summer camp there. And that really was where I got, excited about people like Thoreau and started appreciating the benefits just on a personal level of spending time in nature. And growing up on the East Coast, I realized pretty early, let's say, that we did not have any old trees. And then I realized that was a misnomer because some stands of old trees in Florida, or rather in North Carolina, and a couple other pockets here and there. And so, spring break, other kids were going to Daytona Beach, and we were backpacking in the Smoky Mountains, out the old growth. So I suppose pretty deep set love of nature. And so actually I studied a bit of that in college, resources in the environment, then worked in conservancy after college. So that path was pretty linear. And then I took a left turn and gave into some of the sort of weakness for sports cars that was, really an early love. And my interest in design was budding in my early 20s. And I got an opportunity to work at Ferrari, not the world's most ecological company, certainly, but a place where I had a lot of lessons learned around branding. There's not a huge company, but one of the top 50 brands known worldwide, and a company driven by passion, not to mention design. And so these things were kind of taken with me as I went into grad school in design and applied all of these learnings and sort of other startup experience to the guitar company. So when we launched, we were very much, backpacking guitars, travel guitars, which was a totally selfish interest that I had, right? Wanted to make a good guitar for writing songs in the Sierra Nevada mountains. So this is a selfish endeavor in its origin. And the influence was clearly from my days at Ferrari, with a design being one piece carbon fiber. And, I had trouble reconciling this notion that we were, as a society, as a planet, not taking care of our resources, not thinking about the future from a long-term survival perspective. And then so, kind of around the time I had my first kid, I was discovering LCA, life cycle analysis assessment, and realized that our carbon fiber guitars were worse from an LCA perspective than old growth rainforest wood. And, I had some friends sort of hold the mirror to my face too and say, hey, you were supposed to be this big eco guy. My degree was more or less oriented on eco design. And so, one friend in particular, Aya, told me that, he was surprised that I was using these materials. And so I had a little bit of a crisis there and started researching what we could do to replace carbon fiber. At the same time, customers were wanting more of a wood-like experience because guitars, acoustic guitars, and ukuleles are made out of wood. So we started messing around, and then after a scant 6 years, figured out that if we took linen fiber and blended it with bio-based resin, we could get a sound and a look that was very similar to old growth wood, if not better. And so I'm happy to say that today Aya works with me here at both Blackbird and Lingrove, and that we've made the switch on the Blackbird side entirely from carbon fiber to our own branded material, which we call Ecola.
And for folks who aren't familiar, what is Blackbird?
So Blackbird Guitars is that first company, and so founded in 2007, initially focused on smaller-bodied travel guitars, and now has a whole line of guitars and ukuleles.
And so you founded Blackbird and you founded Lingrove.
When we launched our first Ecola instrument after several years of making carbon fiber acoustic instruments, back in 2013, a little ukulele named Clara, the notion was a lot of designers like myself were going to be interested in this new material because it's high performance, because it looks like wood, and because it's ecological, frankly. And so we launched Lingrove initially just as sort of a catch-all to sort of, let's say, stoke interest and be a place where we could start engaging designers in conversations. And so since then, I've been dealing, sort of running both of the companies, and now Blackbird's sort of has its own team, and Lingrove has its own team. And I'm more focused today on Lingrove.
And so Ecola is the name of the material that you are making out of flax and what you call a bioresin, which we're going to get into since I doubt that people know what a bioresin is. But when I first heard the name Ecola, I mean, I presumed it was like a cool sounding but made up name, that it didn't really mean anything. But that's not true, right? It does actually have a meaning.
Yeah, it does. Names are a really good opportunity for businesses to add connection, emotional connection. So one of the things as not just a designer, but marketing here, I take that process really seriously. It's often very painful and usually requires like last minute, improvisation to actually finalize. But the idea with Ecola is that initially we made a ukulele, and ukuleles, or ukulele as it's supposed to be pronounced, are typically made of koa wood, which is an endangered wood only grown on the big island of Hawaii. And so when it was time to come up with a name, and our first product application was this ukulele, it became this kind of combination of eco and koa. And combining those for folks that appreciate koa wood, which is really a figured wood, a very beautiful wood, an endangered wood. For me, every time I say it, it has a lot of meaning. And then for folks that kind of decipher it as well. And so we figured, hey, we have this high performance wood that's rare. And, we want to make sure that high performance remains a big part of our story. And that plus eco, which in many cases often means, hey, this is going to be less good, not as high performance, wanted to kind of nip that right in the bud by giving the name that gravitas that comes from being associated with a kind of exotic high performance wood.
So why flax?
Flax is the oldest, basically, textile material, or rather crop, grown by humans. We have thousands of years of history growing this material. And from the earliest days, it was the high performance option. And so we don't think of ancient Egypt and high performance, but in fact, one of the reasons for the Egyptian civilization to have come up and become a kind of the world's first massive civilization was because they had flax to make their sails and their ropes. And that tradition continued through the Romans and even into, let's say, the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century. And the reason that flax is so phenomenal is actually because the fibers, which we get from the stalk of the plant, are the stiffest natural fibers available. And so when we think about flax, a lot of Americans think about the seeds, right? And that's the top of the plant. And so today, most of the flax is grown in Canada for those seeds, and the stalk is actually thrown away. We are getting our flax fibers from Europe, but eventually are going to going to take that waste stream and incorporate it in our production of our Ecola material. Flax is also CO2 negative. And so that's a huge benefit, let's say, over fiberglass, which is a comparable material from a performance perspective. It's heavily energy embodied and has a large global warming potential. Most structural materials we use today, from concrete to steel to even wood, are not helping with global warming. They're hurting. And so with flax and with many natural fibers, we have an opportunity to use a structural material that is grown and sequestering carbon in its growth. Add to that, it's a good cover crop. It doesn't require irrigation. And so, from a kind of holistic perspective, and one does have to think about these things holistically, flax it's a win-win. It's high performance, it looks like wood, and it's really quite good for the environment.
Nice. So, Joe, how do you make Ecola? I mean, you mentioned it's not just flax, that there's some bioresin. So what is a bioresin? Have you patented this bioresin? Like, how did you invent this product?
Well, this is not all me, right? Lingrove was founded by myself and Desi Banatao, who is a kind of eco-epoxy guru.
What a title to have, an eco-epoxy specialist. There's the market for them must be huge.
Yeah, and you got that right. Well, his company got purchased by a large company in Michigan called the Goujon brothers. So I'm sure that they would miss all of the sarcasm in this conversation. It's a trade secret deal, and treefree resins are a formulator, and we own the formulation. And 50% of the resin comes from essentially biomass production, for fuels and glycerin. And so this is waste stream product that's been upcycled and blended with conventional epoxies to make our resin. And I realize this sounds all very esoteric. So epoxies are a two-part or multi-part formulation that when you mix together creates a chemical reaction and makes an incredibly high-performance material. We use these resins with our linen to make Ecola, right? It's part fiber and part resin. But what's important to note about composites is that the fiber is what makes it strong. The resin is just there to hold the fibers together. We're also looking and working with other kinds of resins. So when we're talking about car interiors or furniture and the sort of mass production, those are more recyclable style resins or thermoplastics.
So you mentioned you're really into design, but you're talking a lot about science. Did you learn a lot about science in this process?
Well, yeah, before there were apps, designers were supposed to know about materials, believe it or not.
When the world was in black and white, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. And when we were living in the physical realm, which, by the way, I think that's part of the sort of background, the elephant in this conversation, right? Is that we are still living in a physical world, and we have to worry about that world a little bit more.
We're living in an AR world, not augmented, but actual reality.
Right, as we speak on Skype. By all means, I'm a designer by trade, and so what our first mandate as a designer is to generate desire and to have someone look at something or handle it or use it, and they want to acquire it. Right, that's what we have in our tool chest, so to speak, to differentiate product, and that's what my primary role is, and what I was trained to do. And materials are a big part of that story. As I started making the guitars, I had to learn about this esoteric world of composite materials, carbon fiber, fiberglass, and now our Ecola material. And, that was a long process. And so part of that process, as you kind of picked up on, Tony, is that I became a super materials nerd. And that's kind of let's say, the basis of good design, in my opinion.
Nice. So, Joe, you mentioned these reasons why flax is better. So it doesn't require irrigation, it's CO2 negative, it grows really fast. But have you done an actual life cycle analysis? I mean, you said when you were working on carbon fiber using for guitars, you found out from the LCA it was actually worse. So have you done an LCA on this, on Ecola?
We haven't had to do that, happily, at this point, because other people have. And, other people have messed around with linen fibers to make products. It's true that we're the first to market via Blackbird with any product. And so in some respects, we understand how to use these materials, let's say from both a marketing perspective and positioning perspective, but also from, let's say, production perspective. But other people, and there are some organizations in Europe that have done some of the heavy lifting for us. And compared to, let's say, fiberglass, we have zero toxicity versus roughly 9 kilograms as measured. That's how they sort of measure those sort of things. CO2 emissions are close to zero versus like 2.2, that's kilograms as well. And then non-renewable energy consumption is virtually zero versus, I think it's 5 megajoules per kilogram if you really want to get nerdy. And so we're very much sticking to the numbers. And I think it's really important for businesses today to understand deeply the impacts of what they're doing. Even if the end customer doesn't want all that information, at the end of the day, you're going to be found out if you're just greenwashing. And so for us, it's really fundamental as far as our brand to be the truly uncompromised choice.
Do you get recognized for your efforts in transparency with being green?
I would say we're a little bit early stage for recognition outside of the verticals that our materials have entered into. So we have some large, let's say verticals like transportation that I mentioned in furniture. Those we're probably only going to really see impacts next year. And so this year and previous years, our Ecola material, other than the musical instruments, which we've by all means had a fair amount of recognition in, we found some recognition via our customers now because we're selling materials to them in sports equipment. So fishing rods and, we won sort of the Green Composites Award, as well as in various board applications. So mainly industry, mainly in the composites realm.
That's really cool. Congratulations. Is flax cheaper than wood to use?
That is a tougher one to answer. Briefly, wood comes in all different shades or types. And so we are definitely cheaper than the nearly gone old growth rainforest wood, or old wood, which is still, represents a $50 to $100 billion black market today. We are more expensive than your fairly low quality, I call it Frankenwood, the kind of stuff that, let's say, certain manufacturers still use a lot to make their furniture that often breaks rather quickly. We're not going to throw anyone under the bus.
Does it sound like Ecola?
No comment. And then, so, also plantation wood, right? So this is wood that's grown commercially, is often very low cost, and, they grow it for pulp and making paper, but it's also, let's say white pine as an example. And that's fairly inexpensive. It's also monoculture and not super high quality. And it's not the wood that people really ideally choose to make anything.
So, Joe, you assert that Ecola is not just an alternative to wood, but that it actually is functionally superior to wood, right? That it has benefits. It's lighter but stronger, and that you have other benefits, like if you're using a guitar, that you would prefer the sound of it, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Can you demonstrate that for us right here and prove to us how good it sounds?
With my voice? No, I'm just joking. So hopefully this is in tune. Well, let me just first say it's really simple. It's a matter of stiffness to weight. And our Ecola material is simply lighter for equivalent stiffness than any wood you can buy. And it's about 10 times stronger, say.
So if you're like a rock star and you want to smash your guitar on stage, it's going to be 10 times harder to do.
Well, stiffer, not stronger.
Oh, okay.
Depends where you smash it. Yeah, if you want to take your $3,000 guitar and do that, by all means, that would be good for business. So yeah, I'm going to play a quick ditty filtered through my computer speakers and Skype.
Sounds like a regular. Very cool. Sounds very good. I can't prove that you are not playing something off of YouTube right now, but I believe that you're playing it and it sounds really good.
I guess I should have sang along. Blackbird Savoy was what I just played, which is a small body acoustic. And by all means, check it out online at blackbirdguitar.com.
Yeah, I'll also drop that link in the show notes. Back to business. How much money have you raised and how many people are working there right now?
Well, we're not divulging our raise at the moment, but we are a pre-seed company at the moment. And there are 7 of us here at Lingrove.
So, Joe, you're doing guitars, you said some furniture. I think I saw at a Indie Bio Accelerator event at like Demo Day, I think I saw a chair of yours as well there. What are you selling in the marketplace like right now? Like if I if I wanted to buy some Ecola to build my home out of, could I do that?
Yeah, so today we are making rolls of material, and they are used to mold in plastic processes and to make flat panels. And so a lot of the companies that are buying from us today are accustomed to getting composite materials in some form and processing them. And that means, putting them in a mold or putting them in a press and applying pressure and heat to molding them, depending on what kind of material they buy. And soon we're hoping to have partnerships with these sort of companies to make panels and sell panels even at your local Home Depot. Our first target is business to business. And so that means working with large furniture companies, working with sports equipment companies, and eventually, transportation as well as even building equipment, building materials, I should say. And so today you can buy products using these materials and you can buy roll stock.
If you get into Home Depot, how do you think the wood industry will view and treat you?
That's a good question. What we make is not really an ersatz in the same way as, let's say, some of the meat replacement, which is, I think, somewhat where you're going with the question. A panel of Ecola is going to be about a fifth the weight or less than like a panel of plywood. And so we're going to be positioning this as a way to lightweight your home, lightweight any application. And we all should be thinking about lightweighting. That's, with 7 billion people, if we could cut the weight of everything we do or the mass of everything we do significantly, that could really help with transportation energy use, right? Someone like, a big forest company, they may be a partner. I think they're also going to, of course, see us as a threat. And so we'll see how that plays out. I don't have a crystal ball on that one. We have presented to forestry companies already, and I would say the reaction has been mixed.
Speaking of reducing our weight, are any environmental groups supporting you?
We are just starting those sort of relationships today. That hasn't been our main focus yet, but we're talking to a few different ones and probably are going to be outside of the standard forestry world because I think some of those people do view us as a conflict of interest. So stay tuned on that one.
Speaking of lobby groups that might want to protect the environment, a lot of economists suggest that, for example, a carbon tax or maybe like a revenue neutral carbon tax and dividend program would help to achieve the emissions reductions we need to curb the worst forms of climate change. Do you think that there are any new governmental policies that we need to help prevent deforestation or policies to help incentivize the type of innovation that you at Lingrove are doing? Like, what would you prescribe to policymakers to help prevent deforestation?
It's an interesting, auspicious moment for this interview because, today the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change just released a report saying that we have till basically 2030 to turn the tide. And after that, things are going to be even more bleak, say. And in saying that, I think actually there's a lot of room for optimism. But part of the story certainly is just curbing deforestation, a lot of which has to be a policy issue. When we think about what private sector can do, I think one really important thing is avoiding the greenwashing scenario where some kind of superficial green aspect, like as one company put it recently, changing their light bulbs from fluorescent to LED, not a bad thing, but that is not going to do the change. It's not going to create the change that is needed, right? Our general view is that plants are the right way to sequester carbon and that beyond CO2, we need to mobilize business, mobilize policy, governments, and do that on a global scale to start holistically looking at ways to deal with some of the biggest issues. I call them like the four horsemen of the global climate change apocalypse. And so we mentioned deforestation is a big one. Obviously, livestock is fairly large, though less of an issue than even deforestation. Energy production and construction. If we think about things like making material replacement for construction, that's an opportunity to really turn the tide. And I was surprised not to hear anything about that around this intergovernmental panel. They're looking at technologies that we have not yet invented That sounds pretty depressing, right? I think we have plenty of technology that we've already invented and we're just kind of waking up to. And I think even looking towards the past to find solutions, right? We're using a solution that was used 10,000 years ago in some respects. I think, nothing's prescriptive other than let's work on the biggest problems and look at solutions that cross genres of these problems. And that's where I think we really stumbled across one that's important because it touches on deforestation, it touches on construction, and it touches on energy use.
Nice. So coming toward the end here, Joe, are there any resources that you would recommend? Anybody who maybe is inspired, they want to start their own company, maybe want to join a company, who wants to take a bite out of deforestation, what would you recommend? Books, videos, anything else?
The original one would be Natural Capitalism. That's the original book that sort of inspired a whole generation of us, I would say. And that's Amory Lovin's. There's another website that I've been looking at for real information on climate change, right? People that are ready to dig in. And if they're working on coming up with an eco-oriented business and trying to keep themselves honest about it, is Mongo Bay. That's Mongabay. They're out of Menlo Park here, and they publish kind of real journalism on the matter. Those are two good ones I would say to start with. And they're welcome to get in touch with me if they have any other specific questions.
And lastly, we would love to know for what you are grateful.
I'm grateful that we still have 5% of the redwood forests here in California for me to take my kids to see, and that are protected, and that before all of the news of climate change happened in the last few decades, that folks without that foresight thought it was important enough to save these as inspiration. And of course, they've been a big inspiration for me.
Yeah, they certainly are an inspiration for me as well. Whenever I go up there, I always it's like being in awe to see these huge trees. But then also it's so saddening to see because you see trucks leaving with them. And it's like I have noticed like the trees by the road or where hikers like to go are remaining, but I do see a lot of them coming out of there. It's always sad to see.
I think if everyone went through those forests, we'd have a different world for sure. The other thing that I think people here in Northern California, and you guys as well, can relate to is this notion of, the sort of cataclysmic aspects of climate change, right? The forest fires that we've been contending with for the last couple of years. You guys broke the record last year, not a record anyone wants to break. And then we just broke the record a couple months ago here for the largest forest fires in California's history. For me, these trees are really, they represent, as a designer, a way to design a kind of structure that's resistant to fires and that can survive fires. And so beyond even just the eco story and the awe of these 300-foot trees, 1,000-plus-year-old trees, is they're so evolved. They're part of the dinosaur era, and they have all these built-in fire kind of resistant properties that should serve as an inspiration, certainly where we live.
Joe, we're grateful to you for all that you and your teammates at Lingrove are doing to try to help keep trees in the ground where they can serve as sequesters of carbon and also provide habitat for wildlife and provide a nice place for us to go visit. So thanks for all you're doing to use your business for good. We're really grateful to you.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, folks, thanks so much for listening to the show.
We hope you got a lot out of it and that you will show us some love. You can rate Business for Good as 5 stars on iTunes, support us on Patreon, and tell your friends interested in business or really just in making the world a better place about the show.
And we'd love to hear what you're thinking. Please feel free to contact us anytime via our website, businessforgoodpodcast.com.
And as always, we hope that you will be in the business of doing good.